The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandra Dumas, Dover Publications, Abridged Edition. Chapter 8, Villefort and Mercédès. As we have said, Villefort hastened back to the Rue de Grand Cour, and on entering the house of Madame de Saint-Méran, found the guests he had left at table seated in the salon at their coffee. Renée with the rest of the company was anxiously awaiting him, and he was received with a universal fire of exclamations. "Hello, Decapitator, guardian of the state, Brutus," said one. "Tell us your news." "Are we threatened with a new reign of terror?" asked another one. "Has the Corsican ogre broken loose?" cried a third. "Marquise," Villefort said, advancing toward his future mother-in-law, "I have come to ask you kindly to excuse my abrupt departure. Monsieur le Marquis, would you honor me with a few moments' private conversation?" "Is it so serious that I must take leave of you Is it really so serious as all that?" the Marquis asked, noticing the dark cloud that had gathered on Villefort's brow. "It is so serious that I must take leave of you for a few days." "You are going away?" Renée cried, unable to conceal the emotion she felt at this unexpected news. "Alas, mademoiselle, I am obliged to do so." "Where are you going?" asked the Marquise. "That is a state secret, madame, but if you have any commissions for Paris, a friend of mine is going there tonight." Everyone looked at him. "You wish to speak to me?" asked the Marquis. "Yes, let us go into your study." The Marquis took Villefort's arm, and they left the room together. "Well, and what has happened?" "An affair which I consider to be of a very grave nature, and which necessitates my immediate departure for Paris. Will you give me a letter to the king?" "To the king? But I dare not take upon myself to write to his majesty." "I do not ask you to write the letter. I want you to ask Monsieur de Savieux to do so. He must give me a letter which will enable me to gain his majesty's presence without all the formalities attendant on the request for an audience which would only lose precious time." "If it is so urgent, my dear Villefort, go and pack your things, and I will make de Savieux write the letter." "Do not lose any time. I must start in a quarter of an hour." So saying, Villefort ran out, but at the door he bethought himself that the sight of the deputy of the Procureur du Roi running through the streets would be enough to disturb the general peace of the town, so he resumed his ordinary magisterial pace. At his door he perceived in the shadow a white spectre waiting for him, erect and motionless. It was Mercédès. Having no news of Edmond, she had come in person to inquire the reason of her lover's arrest. As Villefort drew near, she moved from the wall against which she had been leaning, and barred his way. Dantès had spoken to the deputy of his betrothed, and he now recognized her at once. He was astonished at her beauty and dignity, and when she asked him what had become of him whom she loved, she felt as though he were the culprit, and she his judge. "The man you speak of," he said abruptly, "is a criminal, and I can do nothing for him." A great sob escaped Mercédès' lips, and when Villefort tried to pass by, she again stopped him. "But tell me at least where he is," she said, "so that I may learn whether he is alive or dead." "I know not," was the answer. "He has passed out of my hands." Embarrassed by the straight look she gave him, as also by her entreaties, he pushed by her and entered his house, locking the door after him, as though to shut out all sadness. But sadness is not banished so easily. Like the wounded hero of Virgil, he carried the arrow in his wound. He had no sooner entered his room than his legs gave way under him. He heaved a deep sigh, which was more like a sob, and sank into his chair. For a moment the man was in doubt. He had often passed sentence of death, but the condemned men who owed their execution to his crushing eloquence had not caused him the slightest compunction, for they had been guilty, or at all events Villefort had believed them to be so. But if at this moment the fair Mercédès had entered and had said to him, "In the name of Almighty God, who watches over us and is our judge, give me back my lover," he would have given way, and in spite of the risk to himself, his icy cold hand would have signed the order for Dantès' release. But no voice broke the stillness. The door opened only to admit Villefort's valet, who came to tell him that his carriage was at the door. Poor Mercédès had returned to the Catalans, followed by Fernand. Grief-stricken and desperate, she threw herself on her bed. Fernand, kneeling by her side, took her hand, which she did not attempt to withdraw, and covered it with kisses, but she was oblivious to it all. So passed the night. The lamp went out when the oil was consumed. Mercedes was no more aware of the darkness than she had been of the light. Day broke, but she heeded it not. Grief had made her blind to all but Edmond. Monsieur Morel did not give up hope, and he had learnt of Dantès' imprisonment, and had gone to all his friends and all the influential men of the town. But it was already reported that Dantès had been arrested as a Bonapartist, and since even the most sanguine looked upon any attempt of Napoleon's to remount the throne as impossible, he met with nothing but coldness, fear, or refusals, and returned home in despair. Caderousse was restless and uneasy, but instead of trying to do something to help Dantès, he had shut himself up in his house with 2 bottles of wine. Danglars alone felt no pang of remorse or restlessness. He was even happy, for he had not avenged himself on an enemy, and assured of him for himself the position on board the Pharaon he was in danger of losing. He was one of those calculating men who are born with a pen behind their ears and an ink pot in place of a heart. He went to bed at the usual hour and slept peacefully.